Kawasaki are set to release 2 new motorcycles for the year 2025, which are going to be replacing the Ninja 1000 SX and the Versys 1000, and in place is going to be an 1100cc version of both of these motorcycles. Now, what I find interesting about this is that I'm not sure why Kawasaki felt the need to do this. Both of these bikes are already running a 1043cc inline 4, and it's looking like as if they're going to basically be remaining exactly the same in terms of engine design, but with a little bit of extra displacement. Because when I first heard about this rumour, I thought Kawasaki were probably going to go the route of Honda, a bit like their Rebel 1100 and the Africa Twin, where it was going to be a big parallel twin-cylinder engine. But apparently not. Kawasaki are sticking to their guns with the inline 4s, which means that we're probably going to see a nice little bump in horsepower. But for the most part, I think the bikes are going to be very similar to the ones they're going to be replacing. I mean, it might give us a little bit more fuel economy, something like that, maybe. But we'll just have to wait and see later on this year what the specs are going to be of the bike and whether or not it is actually going to be an inline 4 or if it's going to be a totally redesigned engine. At this point, I don't think we have any confirmation whether or not this is just a small increase in displacement or whether or not there are some bigger changes being made to this platform. Now, I've had the privilege of riding both the 1000 SX and the Versys 1000, and I'll tell you what, they're both absolutely fantastic motorcycles, both in their own right. They feel totally different to ride, and even the power output feels totally different. The 1000 SX has a nice amount of torque going all the way through the rev range, and it's got a lovely amount of top-end horsepower, whereas the Versys, all of its torque is in the first 8,000 RPM, then after that it really drops off, and there is quite a big performance difference between the Versys and the 1000 SX. So I think the 1000 SX from memory is producing around about 145 horsepower or so, whereas the Versys, I think, is closer to about 112, 110 horsepower, something like that. So not really a lot of horsepower, but then again, the Versys isn't really designed to be a quick motorcycle. It is certainly quite a big motorcycle in terms of the frame and the feel, but actually when you're riding it and you're trying to move it around, it is pretty nimble, and leaning it over, you can do a surprising amount of lean on the Versys 1000. Both of these motorcycle platforms, I think they are catering for two slightly different audiences. Now, even though the Versys is kind of marketed and it looks like an adventure bike, some of you have let me know in the comments when we did a review of that bike that it is more of an adventure tourer, so it's not really designed for off-roading. But, you know, the 1000 SX is a proper thoroughbred touring monster. To be honest, both of these bikes, they do share quite a lot in common, but actually they feel totally different to ride, honestly. The 1000 SX feels a little bit more nimble than the Versys, and it's got a load more power than the Versys as well. If any of you have had the opportunity to ride a Versys and a 1000 SX, it's a no contest. The 1000 SX is just on another level in terms of performance, and I think that's probably the audience that it's catering for, an audience where, a little bit like the ZZR 1400, to be perfectly honest with you. It's a platform where the rider has the opportunity to take it for long journeys if they wanted to, but if they wanted a bit more of a sporty, a more exciting, a more thrilling riding experience, then the 1000 SX certainly delivers on that front, and I think it really does nip at the heels of motorcycles like the H2 SX. Honestly, it's a fantastic motorcycle in so many ways, and it's just that amount of torque that bike can produce. It is crazy. Whereas the Versys, it doesn't seem to have that same bite. I think that the Versys is a little bit more comfortable of a riding experience. The seat is much more spongier, and you can fit a lot more touring gear on the Versys than you probably could on the 1000 SX. And I think the Versys is the only motorcycle at the moment in Kawasaki's roster where you can fit a top box and panniers, all with an official Kawasaki rack, so to speak, pannier and top box mount. Whereas the 1000 SX only has a rail from Kawasaki for panniers, at least official panniers anyway. I'm sure that there are rails out there that you could get that are aftermarket that could fit a top box as well. But the 1000 SX is not quite a touring bike like the Versys, in my humble opinion, at least after riding them. But they're both absolutely fantastic motorcycles, and I think if you're looking for a more chilled, laid-back experience, then the Versys is certainly the motorcycle. It really doesn't bite your head off a little bit like the 1000 SX does. So it is is quite a consideration. This new engine design is probably going to affect the SX more than the Versys. I really don't think the Versys is going to feel all that different, to be honest with you. And ideally, it would have a little bit more torque going for it. If I wanted anything out of the Versys, it would be a little bit more torque and maybe a little bit more power sustained throughout the rev range. But I don't know. Those are just the motorcycles that I like to ride. You guys know me. I love torque. I love having torque on my bikes. And if I've got a nice amount of top-end horsepower as well, then that's just the cherry on top for me. Because it really does give you the best of both worlds. Whereas the Versys really drops off towards the top end of the rev range, the 1000SX just carries on. It pulls like a train. Seriously, the 1000SX is, I think, quite an underrated motorcycle these days, especially when you put it up against bikes like the H2SX or even the ZH2. And when Kawasaki had a Z1000, I tell you what, I bet that bike would have given the ZH2 a huge run for its money as well. But I absolutely love the ZH2, and similar to the 1000SX and the Z1000, you really do get torque and horsepower. And that's the beauty of this engine. So I think it is going to be a bit of a waste on the Versys. We'll see what the performance numbers are going to be like for the Versys and the 1000SX. But I really do think that the 1000SX is going to benefit the most out of this new engine design. And to be honest with you, if the Versys got a parallel twin like the Africa twin from Honda, I think that would be a great move. It would increase the torque exponentially on that motorcycle. And I think it would make it a hell of a lot more fun. But again, that is the type of motorcycle that I like to ride. So we'll see. I mean, you guys let me know down in the comment section below what you think of the Versys 1000 and whether or not you think it's actually going to benefit this motorcycle with an 1100cc engine instead. And by the way, it's just going from a 1043 to a 1099cc engine. So it's not really a big difference. That's, well, pretty much 60cc divided across 4 cylinders. That's not really a lot of extra displacement, so I really don't see it making much of a difference. Maybe there's going to be a slightly higher compression ratio. I think that is the case between the 1000SX today and the Versys. I think the 1000SX has a higher compression ratio, so that's how it's able to produce that extra horsepower. So that could be a benefit for the 1000SX again, but I really don't see it changing much with the Versys, to be perfectly honest with you. Even the look of the bike, the feel of the bike is going to be pretty much exactly the same. And I think the feel between the two bikes is going to be very, very similar. I'd be surprised if it changes all that much. And Visor Down, they seem to think that, or Motorrad seem to think that the power is going to be upwards of 150 horsepower. I don't know. If it is, it's not going to be that much more than what the current bike is capable of producing. But I find it interesting how we literally were talking about the Versys and the 1000SX recently when we're doing our ride reviews, and how this engine has been around for a long time. I think since 2012, maybe even a little bit older than that. This Kawasaki have been running this engine design in the 1000SX and in the Versys. I mean, before it was the Z1000SX, and they just dropped the Z now. I really did start thinking that maybe this engine is getting a little bit long in the tooth and Kawasaki got to change it up somehow. But I don't know. I really don't see this making much of a difference. I think if it was closer to a 1200cc, then maybe that would make a more significant impact, at least in terms of producing a little bit more torque. I don't know. Horsepower, I mean, 150 horsepower is fine, to be honest with you. You really don't need much more than that. I find that anything over that gets wasted for the most part, because you have to be going a ridiculous speed before you can even start feeling that amount of horsepower. So for me, I don't know, it might seem a little bit pointless having that extra horsepower. Literally recently I've been testing out the ZH2 on the medium power mode, which I think is around about 150 horsepower or so, and that bike is still plenty fun and it still pulls wheelies. It's still fantastic, and it's not quite as snatchy or as I don't know, it's not quite as unpredictable. So I'm just testing out because I haven't really ridden that bike on the medium power mode all that much yet, but I imagine that's what this new 1000SX is probably going to feel like. So if it is, then that's going to be absolutely fantastic, but I really don't see it making much of a difference in terms of the riding experience and in terms of the feel. I think they're both going to be very, very similar to what they are now. And we'll see. Maybe we'll get a little bit of extra MPG out of them. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see on that front. But yeah, you guys let me know what you think about this new development from Kawasaki down in the comment section below. And which one would you prefer to buy if it was your choice, if you were looking at both the 1100 Versys or the 1100 SX? Which one would you buy? And do you think it might be nipping at the heels just a little bit more of the H2 SX? Let me know down in the comment section. But thank you ever so much for joining us on this first look at the 1100cc engine that's going to be coming out in the Versys and I was going to say the 1000 SX, but the 1100 SX. And you guys let me know what you think about them down in the comment section below, and whether or not this is serving, I don't know, a new kind of part of the industry. Maybe there's a market for riders that are looking for a little bit of a bump in horsepower. You guys let me know down in the comment section. And of course, as always, go ahead, leave that like if you've enjoyed this video, you found it informative. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more motorcycle news from us. But thanks again, take care, ride safe, and we'll catch you all in the next video. Have a good one.